Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I got one good morning out of the group. We're going to go ahead.
How y'all doing?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. We're going to have everybody get their seats. I've got 8 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome all our in-person as well as our virtual attendees for the PFAS. My name is Gene Jones. I'm the executive director for an organization called the Southern Waste Information Exchange. We're a small nonprofit group out of Tallahassee, Florida, that assists industries and municipalities with waste issues. This whole event got started 2 years ago, I think, guys. It seems like that, but yeah, actually it did. The concept this actually came up from a series at the Florida Chamber of Environmental Permitting School, where I decided to go sit in a class and learn about something called PFAS. I had no idea what PFAS was, but it intrigued me by looking at the original information about it. And after sitting and listening to some of our speakers that you're going to hear from today, I thought, oh, wow, this could make sense. And so we decided to team up, pull up with some resources with some folks that are expert subject matter in the area. And let me do what I do, and that is to bring people together to network and to educate folks and let experts do that education. It's not me, it's the experts. So if you allow me, let me make a couple of opening comments. First off, anybody got a cell phone in person? If you will, put your cell phones on flight. You'll be the first one to do that. Second thing, as you can see, I'm not wearing a mask. If you're in here, masks are not required inside this meeting room because of our spacing situation. They are required in hallways. They are not required for lunch. If you're eating or drinking, so get that up. My speakers. If you want to wear a mask, please do so. This conference is being organized by Environmental Industries Conference Management, the International Society of Environmental Professionals, Southern Waste Exchange, Florida State University, and Environmental University. I have to give recognition to my steering committee. If you allow me to do that just real quickly. Joe Applegate, Jorge Caspary, Reverend Cheryl Clark, Ellen Evelyn, Michael Goldstein, Frank Hurt, Laurel Lockett, Taryn McKnight, Robin Neely, Howard Nelson, Ron Noble, Gary Rose, and Dr. Chris Teeth. Without them, they're the ones that help me guide this program. Also, if you allow me, I need to thank our sponsors. We started this, we tried to put this off last year, so we started planning, I guess in the summer of 2019, and something called COVID hit. I haven't run a conference since November of 2019. So I've had to retrain my brain to figure out how to pull one of these things off. And this is actually the first time I've worn a suit since 2019. Our gold sponsors, Geosyntec, Mechanic Nuco, Hearn and Webster, Enthalpy Analytical, ECT2, Montrose Environmental. Our silver sponsors, Ackerman, Bilzin Sumberg, Carbon Works, Clark Environmental, Clean Earth, Clean Harbors, Einstein Malinchuk, Eurofins, Green Rock, Harmsco, Gannett Fleming, Langen, HSW, Harmsco Filtration Products, Pace Analytical, MSC Groups, Halls Environmental Services, SGS, TIG, Sevenson Environment, and then some of our supporting organizations, the Florida Brownfields Association, Florida Specifier, Mothers for Mother Earth, and the University of Florida Trio Center. You'll see over the course of the next day and 3 quarters that the way that we've kind of designed this is a mixture of education and networking. I don't know about you all, but it sure does feel good to get back to some in-person networking. Sorry for those virtual attendees that aren't able to participate. We really thank you for joining in and listening to what's going on next day and 3 quarters. Just a couple of opening comments. Let's see the screen below. Attendance-wise, we're at closer to 230 attendees now. Certificate of attendance. Let me mention this. If any of you got a PE or PG, if you need a certificate of attendance, we are able to offer that. I did send an email about that availability that you may want to look into. Restrooms are down the hall. Hotel Business Center is also just right out the hall to the left. Conference support. If anybody in-person attendance needs assistance, please let us know at the registration desk. I know one of the things that we're going to get asked about is, are the presentations available? Yes, they are. All the presentations that you will see will be shot to PDF, and we'll provide that in proceedings, as well as this entire forum is being recorded. So we'll have a video recording that, so you come back and watch it at leisure. For those virtual attendees, if you need to run out for a little bit, don't worry, come back and watch it. The attendee list. We provide the attendee list, names, titles, and affiliations to everyone. We do offer a VIP upgrade that will provide the contact information. On that point, if you do not want your name released, and that includes our virtual attendees, please let me know. Extract you out from that list. Abstracts and speakers. I've asked the moderators not to go through and read bios at this point, mainly because of lack of time. We've got a lot of presentation to go over. All of that is contained in the speaker compendium that I sent out to everybody. We've got the bios as well as the abstracts. So, sponsors. A little bit of self-promotion. We are doing the Florida Remediation Conference, which will be an in-person event November 17th and 19th. And at the same time, I decided I would run 2 conferences at the same time, as if I don't have to do. We're going to do the International Symposium and Exhibition on Redevelopment manufacturing site. So 2 environmental remediation conferences being run at the same time, shared exhibit. We should have pretty good attendance for these 2 events. And with that, we are going to jump right into our program. Howard Nelson is going to be our moderator for this program. And we added, just real quick, if I can, a quick little introduction or kind of set the stage. We've asked Jorge to kind of give us an update. And so to Howard to make these introductions, but I think everybody's going to be intrigued on what they are going to be announcing in terms of what's going on legislatively, not only here in the state of Florida, but nationwide. So, Howard, thank you.
Now that Gene has taken my entire presentation, but that's good because it'll mean my presentation small. My name's Howard Nelson. I chair the environmental practice at Miami's Bilzin Sumberg. Nothing notable about that, except that I have 6 excellent speakers for the opening session. And the opening session is really designed to give you a flavor and a taste of what we're doing for the next 2 days. So let me run through our 6 speakers, 3 of whom are here in real life, 3 of whom will be attending remotely. Yes. You're one of our speakers. You're not sure we want you to speak, or? I'll vacate my chair. So as I was saying, I've got 4 of them in person and 2 that will be presenting remotely. And let me run through who our speakers are. Our first 2 speakers will be speaking jointly on an overview of regulatorily what's happening. Lockett, Jorge, Caspary. Laurel is a senior partner at Carlton Fields, concentrating our practice on environmental real estate matters. Graduate of Boston University School of Law, and a noted speaker and author on environmental topics. Jorge Caspary, one of the only people I know, by the way, principal at WSource, one of the only people I know who actually has a good degree from both University of Florida and Florida State University. A rarity. I didn't think that that's like oil and water mixing. And former director of the Division of Waste Management for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Eric Sager, who's a senior principal geologist with Geosyntec, an MS in geology from East Carolina University, and a frequent speaker on PFAS issues. Megan Garcia, project scientist at AECOM. Dr. Tim Townsend, who's the Edmund Jones Professor of Environmental Engineering at UF. He's not here, so I can feel free to mention Dr. Townsend is what we call a triple gator, an undergraduate, master, and doctorate at the University of Florida, and concentrates his research on solid and hazardous waste management. And then Paul Rule, environmental remediation coordinator at Lafarge and a graduate of both Alma College and the University of Detroit. I'm going to go sit down in the audience and let Laurel and Jorge kick it off.
Okay. This is my first appearance in public and not normally. Everybody's working from home. It's like, just by the nature of this topic, I think we're kind of reading the course here. So some of the as you know, this all basically starts here in Florida. Certain parties, right? PFAS contamination. Jorge, the honor represent the city of Pensacola, which is one of the parties that has received those letters. Pensacola has both an airport as well as associated fire stations and fire training facilities near the airport that have given rise to issues. We started year before last kind of a late effort to try and come up with a very surgical approach to the liability concerns with kind of a surgical modification of the brownfield statute to facilitate plugging in the PFAS sites into that. We got a late start. We didn't get Senate sponsorship and we sort of died on the vine. This year we had a much more aggressive program in combination with the League of Cities and Rebecca O'Hare, who's their executive director. Great asset. And we put together a very robust bill that would have dealt with these issues. Senate Bill 1054, and then we had a House companion 705. And although the bill failed, I'm told typically it's a 2 to 3 process to get something passed. And we learned a lot along the way, and I just want to kind of talk you through what we attempted to do, and I think ultimately what we'll see is coming. So one of the main components of this, and if you think about it from our standpoint, the city of Pensacola has 53,000 residents. And to think about the multi-million-dollar problem that a PFAS situation imposes in that context, it's like completely out of the scope of what the taxpayers can fund. So our approach was to require DEP to actually go through rulemaking, because as you know right now, they have not actually gone through the formal rulemaking process for any of the provisional standards that are out there. And then we would have required the DEP and the DOH to go through sort of a study process over the next year to kind of figure out, okay, what's the total cost of dealing with this statewide? What are the real risks? And more importantly, what are the funding mechanisms? And kind of from a policy standpoint, what's a fair way of allocating those costs across the state? And the thought was, between sort of abeyance of enforcement during rulemaking and the policy evaluation, that would come together in a year or two with a program to fund and manage it, just like we have for dry cleaning, landfills, petroleum. So that was sort of the most important thing, kind of a pause, and then program implementation. One of the other things that's really, I think, important for something like this is, you know, we have very broad area-wide contamination. We really don't have any tools in the toolbox for efficient closure of those kinds of sites. So you need to have non-recorded institutional controls. You can't rely on getting a restrictive covenant on, you know, hundreds of parcels. So we wanted to recognize formally, statutorily, tools that could be used in the toolbox, most significantly of which, if you had a municipal ordinance that required connection to the municipal supply, that should address the public or the potable water pathway. It makes sense. And that should be sufficient. We also had language to recognize kind of this GIS layer approach that the department is now using with SwiftMud and hopes to roll out in other districts. And then the last piece was we were going to modify the statutory provisions that enable the delineated area rule to allow the department to delineate broad areas of groundwater contamination without going through rulemaking, which currently the delineated area requires. So those were, and there were a few other things, but that was sort of the gist of that. And then on the back end, the existing statute says you only have to provide constructive notice for those sites, meaning publication, and sort of strengthening and reinforcing that. So it would have been a very nice suite of things to help us address closure of these sites. We had a lot of support, Ports Council, Seaport, Airport Council, League of Cities, and I think we'll have that going forward. The buzzsaw, of course, was the plaintiff's bar, and we ran into some unanticipated opposition in on the House side. But I think we've gotten traction, and I think you will see something similar next year. Oh yeah, one of the other things we were trying to address was a change to 376-313, a Florida Supreme Court case in 2019 that basically recognized a cause of action for personal injury within that. And we were trying to address that, to take it back to what it had always been understood to be, which was just to give a cause of action for property damages. So we died a cruel and heartless death, but I think you'll see us again. On the litigation front, and disclosure, I'm not a litigator, but basically you've been seeing cases arising out of PFAS starting in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I don't know how many of you might have seen the Dark Waters movie, which kind of looks like the civil action of PFAS. Out of claims arising out of the DuPont plant in Parkersburg, Virginia, West Virginia. That sort of started an explosion of litigation, primarily within the last 5 years. I mean, until 2015, there were not that many cases, but what we have seen are enormous damage claims. $850 million for restoration of the Minneapolis-St. Paul water supply, class action cases for limited populations, 350, 300 million. So the numbers are really enormous. Because we don't have federal standards yet, most of those cases are all brought using a sort of a broad variety of civil theories: trespass, nuisance, negligence, and then sort of on the product liability side, defective product design, failure to warn. You knew or should have known this was, persistent, toxic, and bioaccumulated, that kind of thing. And then to the extent that a state has an applicable strict liability statute like we do, 376, 313, that kind of claim. So we have had a number of suits filed here in Florida First of which, Emerald Coast Water Supply, which is up in Pensacola, also the city of Stewart. Also some personal injury, sort of mixed claims, the Batista case out of the Ocala Fire College. All of those cases nationally that arise out of AFFF, aqueous firefighting foam, PFAS, all of those cases are now consolidated in what's called a multi-district litigation up in South Carolina. There are hundreds and hundreds of cases all over the country. And if a case gets filed in the state court, it gets removed to federal court, and then it ultimately ends up there. So right now there are 40 water provider cases that are in that pool. And the balance, you know, the other couple hundred so far are like personal injury and property claims. The court has gone through a process of picking out of all of those, the first 10 to try or to look at trying. They're calling them the bellwether water provider cases. And 2 of our cases here in Florida were recently selected. One, the Emerald Coast case, and then the second that was filed by the city of Stewart. So those cases, those 10 cases, the others are, there's like one from South Dakota, Ohio, New York, Massachusetts, California. Those cases are now on kind of an express discovery phase between now and the end of August of this year, following which, out of that pool of 10, a couple will be selected to go to trial. So by early next year, we will know probably who would be selected to go to trial on these bellwether cases. And I would not be surprised if one of the Florida cases is actually selected. And at that point, those cases that are will be remanded back to trial court in the state and will be tried here. Obviously, trying the case, a decision, damages are down the line unless they're settled, but that gives you kind of an idea of the timeline. One of the other things that's sort of interesting, and if you've ever heard me talk about this before, maybe I get to say it, I told you so, but a number of states, particularly in the Northeast, have filed suits on behalf of their entire population to address the problem. The first, Vermont, New Hampshire, then New Jersey, New York, I think Ohio. I'm sure I'm missing some. But the concept is they bring the suit on behalf of the state and its population. They get all the money, and then they basically decide how to distribute it to handle all the claims. Interesting that the first of those 2, Vermont and New Hampshire, had Republican governors. And I had said, well, I don't know if I could see that coming from Florida. But the AG's office actually has put out a request for proposal, and all of the proposals are due at the end of this month, and they are actually considering doing some sort of action on behalf of the state, which is critical for us and for our ultimate goal, because without a funding mechanism, there is no program. I mean, there's no tax you could make or registration fees like, you know, gasoline or dry cleaners to fund this. So, you know, maybe in the grand scheme of things, it's all coming together. And that's certainly our hope, and hopefully we'll be back next year and telling you about how it's all come together. But that's our prognostication. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jorge.
Thank you. I'll be very fast because we got to leave room for our other panelists, and we only have 10 minutes. From a perspective of public policy, as you are probably aware, the EP has just issued their dynamic plan with a February 2021 date. This is as late as a couple of months ago. So the PFAS storm in Florida is here, and it's here to stay. It's not going to go away. Probably regulatory response actions from a lot of cities and fire departments will follow. It's good for our business, certainly for what we do. Nationally, I think this past Friday, the PFAS Act was filed in DC by Representative Dingell, and it has a lot of things going on. So and I know that we gotta speed up, but I will encourage you to Google the Dingell PFAS Act. It has a lot of issues and a lot of concerning issues. One of them is every waste must be incinerated. And so let's just keep it up and see where this leads. But again, in Florida, the PFAS storm is here to stay.
Jorge, Laurel, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Eric Sager on technical and regulatory issues with PFAS.
Okay, thank you. There we go. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about some of the challenges associated with from the regulatory and technical standpoint for PFAS. I don't think I need to talk to this group much about what are PFAS. I think most of us here know that they're per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and that there are synthetic organic molecules that contain multiple fluorine atoms. And that CF bond, it's the shortest and strongest in nature. And as a result, these chemicals are very stable and they're extremely persistent in the environment. And we're going to spend a couple slides because of that, talking about some of the treatment challenges because of their persistence. I think it's also important just to acknowledge that they have garnered a lot of media attention. Aaron Brockovich has been to Florida, and they're also becoming fashionable in Hollywood with a documentary and more recently a major motion picture. And because of this, I think it's important to consider public perception when talking about PFAS. And somewhere is there there we go. So they do have many unique chemical and physical properties. And because of that, there are a lot of viable economic uses, and they are very ubiquitous. We see them in everything. It's probably comfortable to say that if it contains PFAS, it makes your life easier. And because of the ubiquitous nature, we'll spend a slide talking about the importance of having PFAS-specific SOPs. I'm still trying to figure this out. There we go. So you're probably going to hear a lot about AFFF, aqueous film-forming foam, during the next 2 days. And we know it's probably the poster child when we talk about PFAS, but I think it's also important to point out that AFFF only accounts for about 3% of all fluorochemicals produced. So there are a lot of other uses for PFAS. Now let's move on. Let's talk about some of the regulatory challenges, at least from a federal standpoint. You know, the first being that PFAS has not been designated as a hazardous waste under CERCLA, and there are no federal MCLs. EPA, however, has adopted a lifetime drinking water health advisory level, for both PFOA and PFOS of 70 parts per trillion in drinking water, and this is individually or the summation, but they're not enforceable cleanup target levels. And, you know, they're also, the other challenge is, on a regulatory stand, is there's limited triggering mechanisms to require cleanup. Laurel spoke about one of them being litigation. That's one of the triggering mechanisms. We're also back to that public perception and maybe the fear of the litigation. We're also seeing some voluntary cleanup that is controlling that also. And then because of the lack of cleanup standards on the federal level, we are seeing many states take the lead. They are proposing regulatory cleanup values that are much lower than the 70 part per trillion down in the single digits or maybe tens of digits. So they are actually taking the lead on some of those. We're gonna hear, this is a little bit about Florida's regulatory framework, and you're gonna hear more about this later today. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time, but Florida has calculated or adopted provisional cleanup target levels for both PFOA and PFOS in soil and groundwater. It's probably important to mention that groundwater, is equal to the 70 parts per trillion for both PFOA and PFOS. They have also calculated some screening levels for both irrigation water and surface water. I do think it's important to note that they're using these screening levels more for stakeholder discussions. But I do want to point out, 70 parts per trillion is pretty low in groundwater. If you take a look at the human health criteria for surface water, we're talking 10 parts per trillion, which is considerably lower. Again, this is for stakeholder discussion, but I think there are some implications if this does become a regulatory requirement. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about some of the treatment challenges. And I know there's going to be multiple speakers talking about different treatments. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that. We all know that these constituents are very soluble and they're very mobile in groundwater. But because of that, we often see a very large contaminant footprint that adds to the treatment challenges. They also come in complex mixtures. These can be complex mixtures of PFAS, but they can also be commingled with other constituents of concern, whether it be chlorinated or petroleum or whatever. And then we also talked about the properties and the chemical stability of these constituents. And because of that, many of the traditional treatment technologies that we see used for, say, chlorinateds and for petroleum, the destructive in situ technologies just aren't effective on PFAS. And as a result of that, we're entering a new era of pump and treat and dig and haul. And I'm not here to say that there are no treatment technologies. I think there are a lot of potential opportunities out there. We're starting to implement them on a bench scale or even moving into the field scale, but I don't think we've demonstrated, at least through long-term studies, that we have any viable cleanup technologies. I also need to know a lot of the technologies we're relying on today, specifically talking about water, like GAC, carbon, and ion exchange, reverse osmosis. These are focused actually on PFAS removal, not on destruction. So we are still left with a concentrated residual stream that's going to need some treatment. So let's move on. The remainder of the talk is going to be dealing mainly with the challenges associated with PFAS and their site investigations. Now, we are finding PFAS in unexpected places. And recently, I've seen a couple of these come up at redevelopment sites. And as a result, many of the projects without PFAS are becoming projects with PFAS. And then, you know, to complicate factors even further, we're seeing background concentrations, or at least anthropogenic background concentrations at many of the sites. So people are starting to ask, whose PFAS is it anyway? And I know we're going to have a talk tomorrow that talks about forensic investigations and evaluations trying to answer that question. Spend a little bit of time about PFAS-specific SOPs, and this really seems like a mundane topic. We probably wouldn't be talking about it for another constituent. We've already talked about the ubiquitous nature of these. They're in the materials we wear. They're in a lot of the environmental sampling materials that we use. So it's important to avoid cross-contamination and false positive results that are going to jeopardize our data quality objectives and maybe cost your clients money down the road. This is compounded by the fact that, you know, we are dealing with such low cleanup target levels, and parts per trillion and laboratory method detection limits are down in the single parts per trillion. So it is a real thing. I think the important thing also to understand when dealing with SOPs is that they're living documents. They're not static, and you should expect these to change. You should be having conversations with your clients and stakeholders that they are. And I can tell you over the past couple of years, we've probably modified our SOPs 4 or 5 times based on information that we've learned. All right, so let's move in. What does an investigation look like? We like to start with we just call a preliminary assessment. And really the objective of this is to identify potential sources. We start with a desktop review, but it's important to remember these materials have not been designated as hazardous waste. They historically haven't been handled as environmental waste. So a lot of the disposal practices are often not documented and not well understood. So you're left trying to glean as much information you can out of other types of environmental reports. Because of this, we find that the site visit and an interview, you know, very important in the start of an investigation. And what we're trying to do is find people that we can interview that have historical knowledge of practices. And I can tell you there's been multiple instances where we found AFFF use sites and sources just based on these interviews alone that wouldn't have been found through a normal document review. We do take this information, we develop an initial conceptual site model. Again, we're looking for those potential sources. What does the topography look like? What's the geology and the lithology? What's going to be helping control the fate and transport? And so we can help, you know, develop a site assessment work plan. We're also looking to identify potential receptors, and we'll talk a little bit about this on the next couple slides. And then again, we'll prepare a work plan and we go out to investigate potential sources. Now, the investigation techniques that we use aren't much different than we're doing for other constituents, again, taking into consideration the importance of those SOPs. And we're also looking at it in terms of a regulatory framework. What are the requirements that we need on a regulatory framework? But again, looking at that public perception and how we treat these may be driven by public perception and a client's risk tolerance. We use this information to refine our CSM. You know, we may identify as part of this multiple sources. And again, just a little nod out to the forensic investigation if multiple sources are present or if there are background concentrations. And then again, we look to identify those receptors and eliminate exposure pathways. And this is just an acknowledgement, you know, we do have limited treatment technologies. So it's unrealistic to think that we're going to clean these sites under clean closure. They're going to take some sort of closure under a risk-based approach. So the importance of identifying those receptors and eliminating those exposure pathways are even more important to reach, you know, a closure strategy. So I do want to talk a little bit about a few PFAS sources and some of the things that we've learned during our investigation. And this is not an inclusive list. You know, one of them, again, just a nod to AFFF and how much attention it gets fire training facilities and fire stations, you know, just mainly due to use and storage. Release mechanisms, you know, you most often think about is probably spills and leaks, but it's also important to understand equipment calibration. That's one of the things that we have found. This is a routine thing, but equipment calibration can also discharge AFFF. The other one, and this is pretty self-explanatory, is AFFF use sites, just where they've used AFFF. As a nod to the importance of, again, of that understanding the history. We were doing an investigation. It was associated with the fire training facility you see there in the middle of the screen. We had pretty high concentrations of PFAS in groundwater, and we were stepping out to delineate. And we were, you know, thought we were going to go last sample. We were going to collect it at the area on the left. It's called the base support building. Seems pretty innocuous, but when we got out there, we discovered concentrations in groundwater were just about as high as they were at the fire station. So we went back to our preliminary investigation. We identified that the base support building actually used to be a maintenance facility. And then through interviews, we determined that they actually did maintenance on fire trucks. And there was somebody there that saw somebody else, supposedly, push a button and mistakenly dump a whole truckload of AFFF. So just the importance, again, of that preliminary assessment. So two other sources, sewage treatment plants, sludge disposal areas, and landfills. I think we all know that, you know, conventional treatment technologies do not remove PFAS, and if anything, it can convert those precursors to other forms that, you know, have regulatory cleanup standards like PFOA and PFOS. So you're going to put the water in one end of the pipe, and it's going to come out the other end of the pipe wherever that discharge is, whether it's a water body or a spray field. And we all know that, you know, PFAS have been documented to contain in sludges. They can be converted to biosolids and spread elsewhere, or even sludges. Landfills, that's another source. You know, there's a lot of commercial and industrial products that contain PFAS, and they can leach from those materials into groundwater. And obviously, this is more of a concern if you're dealing with an unlined landfill. We do have, you know, lined landfills with leachate collection systems that do minimize the risk of that impact to the environment, or the potential risk that there will be a discharge to the environment. But again, it's important to understand, because landfill leachate oftentimes is taken to an industrial wastewater treatment facility, we know what happens there. And again, it's also possible, and you know, that those sewage treatment plants can send their sludges to landfills to be used as cover. So again, it's important to understand the history, because these two sources just could be swapping PFAS back and forth. All right, let's talk about building a conceptual site model. And I want to start with soil. What is soil? Is it a source for potential direct exposure? Is it a source to groundwater? We've done a fair number of these assessments. I can tell you there's only been one instance where we have seen soil concentrations that are above at least Florida's provisional industrial commercial direct exposure, where it would have triggered some sort of cleanup under a regulatory requirement. So that's one of the good things. Looking at, you know, residential direct exposure, still not as many. About 20% of the site we do see above Florida's provisional residential direct exposure concentrations. But again, it's important to remember these are industrial facilities. So if the owner is willing to restrict the future use to commercial industrial, technically we don't have to do anything with these concentrations, but it does go back to that public perception. And what are we seeing? We're seeing clients that are asking us to take one step further and do human health risk assessments just to demonstrate that if soil is left in place, that it is protective of site workers. And then moving on, we'll talk about Florida's provisional leachability number. This is unfortunately where we see probably 80% of the sites have concentrations that are above that provisional leachability number. But what does it really mean? Do you have to do anything with it? We know these things are very soluble. They're going to leach. The short answer is maybe not. You know, I think the important thing is back to realize that we're going to be closing these sites with conditions. And the important thing here is to show, is the groundwater plume stable? And if you can demonstrate plume stability, most likely you can avoid very costly remediation for your client and just leave the soils in place. So looking at groundwater, let's talk a little bit about groundwater and surface water. At least where I'm looking, but I'm half blind, the figure is difficult to see, but there is supposedly you're looking at two groundwater plumes. On the left-hand side, there's a blue plume. Maybe you can see it better than I can. And offset from that, and this plume is the shallow plume. This is the water table monitoring wells. The red plume's going the other direction, and this is deeper superficial aquifer. What's controlling this? Why do they look different? Groundwater flow is from the northeast down to the southwest. So if you look, the shallow groundwater plume appears like any other plume that mimics groundwater flow. So we need to look in terms and collect data, what's controlling this? Well, through detailed lithologic investigation, we did identify a very low permeability layer beneath the fire training facility that's helping to prevent the vertical migration of that groundwater. But unfortunately, what we see is it's not continuous. And over there with the red plume is going to deeper plume, it's absent. But you know, that's against groundwater flow. So what else is going on? Well, the shallow groundwater plume is discharging into the surface water body there that you see running to the east and west. And this surface water body is transporting material off-site contamination. So what we see is surface water acting as a secondary source to groundwater. And then finally, the area to the south is residential, and there's a lot of potable wells that are further exacerbating and controlling the extent and magnitude of groundwater contamination. So again, you can just start to see some of the challenges and the importance of a well-planned investigation and building that conceptual site model to identify what's going on. All right, so one other mundane topic to talk about that you normally wouldn't talk about is IDW. And I'm sure that we'll hear some more talk about IDW during the next 2 days. Why do we want to talk about this? Well, we want to protect our clients' interests. We don't want them to end up being a PRP in a circle or a Superfund site down the road. And more importantly, maybe, or just as important, there are real costs associated with IDW. When we do one of these investigations, we're generally talking about two types. We're talking about solids and we're talking about liquids. So with solids, you know, again, they haven't been designated as a hazardous waste, so you should be able to take them to a non-haz waste landfill. But what we are seeing is many of those landfills are starting to refuse this type of waste, at least from a PFAS investigation. So what are you left with doing? Well, there's always, you could go to a haz waste landfill, but again, you're talking, there's going to be some costs associated with that. And you still need to do your due diligence and understand how they're dealing with their leachate. Are they taking it off-site, or does that haz waste facility have a closed loop leachate system, which again, helps minimize your client's risk? And then, you know, there's always the Cadillac of options, and that's incineration, but, you know, again, that's going to be even more expensive. Looking at liquids, you know, we know what standard industrial treatment. A lot of times we just send our liquid waste to industrial wastewater treatment facility, and we know that's not working, and they're refusing PFAS waste from PFAS investigations. Again, you can always go to incineration, or you're going to be looking at solidification and dealing with it as a solid material and still dealing with some of the issues that we're talking about before. So let's look into the PFAS crystal ball. What's left? Or maybe it's the PFAS 8 ball asking to ask again later. But where do we see things going in the future? I do think that PFAS SOPs, they're going to continue to evolve, and they should continue to evolve. potential liabilities, even after an investigation is complete, is going to remain, and it may even be heightened depending on what we're seeing with waste disposal facilities. The importance of a well-defined conceptual site model, I think it's going to remain important, especially when navigating investigational challenges. The interaction of the regulatory framework and public perception, I think that's going to continue at least till we have some sort of consensus on the potential health impacts and the approach for developing screening criteria at each of the levels. There will continue to be an emphasis placed on exposure pathways and eliminating those rather than sources, at least until we have some proven remediation technologies. And finally, I do think we're going to see a growth in the forensic evaluation just due to PFAS detections and unexpected locations and from multiple sources. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Our next speaker is Megan Garcia from AECOM. She's going to be speaking remotely on the burning question. Hopefully the pun is intended in there. Should you chase PFAS everywhere? And if we can queue up Megan, and while we're queuing up Megan, I know everybody's forming questions in their mind. We're tight on time, but if this all works well, we should have sufficient time for questions at the end. So I'm going to ask you guys to hold your questions till the end. And if we have Megan, that's great.
All right, good morning, everyone. I am Megan Garcia with AECOM. I just want to thank everyone for having me, and those of you who know me know that I'm really saddened that I cannot attend this great gathering of minds in person. I know it's been a long time coming, waiting, through 2020 for this conference, but I'm very grateful to be in good health and grateful that many of you attending this conference, both virtually and in person, are in good health as well. And so PFAS has probably been on everyone's mind, aside from COVID, through the year. And as we waited for this conference to come back around, and with all the information changing and evolving, it seems every time we hear the news or read an article publishing, it can become very overwhelming. We have different states taking different approaches to the PFAS challenge, and it can be difficult sometimes to help our clients navigate these challenges and stick to what we know about assessment and investigation when we're determining location and magnitude of PFAS sources, and just not get ahead of ourselves by skipping ahead or around. And with that, we're left with this, burning question of PFAS is everywhere. So should you chase PFAS everywhere? Let's just jump right in. The objective of this presentation is really to remind us that we can rely on best practices, as many of us have done for years with many emerging contaminants, to just separate this unfounded concern from our good established environmental science. And a common theme a lot of us hear is PFAS are everywhere. I hear it in conversations and in presentations, and it is a growing concern for a lot of us in a lot of industries. And in fact, PFAS have been found in many, many places, including unexpected places. For an obvious example that we now know, drinking water supplies. And the more places we find PFAS, the more this concern and fear grows. But also a fact we know is PFAS sources are becoming increasingly well understood and subject to this data gathering. And so the solution to this data gathering is using our professional tools to find these potential PFAS source or sources in the environment. And this is where conducting really established preliminary assessments can answer many critical questions like, where's the critical mass of PFAS? Is it capable of reaching drinking water supply? Or even a better question, is drinking water already impacted? And using that information to develop a really robust conceptual site model for each potential release area. So I know this may not sound new or novel to some of you, but that's exactly what I want to accomplish with this presentation, is that we have been here before with other emerging contaminants. And for those of you who have not been involved with very early stages of investigation, or those of us that have and just need a refresher, we can't become overwhelmed with the amount of changing information and let that obstruct our good practices and judgment, which can sometimes drive us to chase PFAS everywhere. So for this presentation, I'll be using a fire training area as a PFAS source because it's pretty straightforward and simplified enough for the purpose of this presentation. I understand we have all levels of experience with PFAS here, from getting ready to retire to getting your feet wet. So I won't go into the details of every potential PFAS source in the environment, but I did want to acknowledge them since this is an early session in the conference and there are so many different industries impacted by this challenge. And if anyone aspires to know a little bit more about each of the sources, or if you find yourself in one of these other potential PFAS sources and want to know more information, feel free to contact me. So let's tackle this common theme of PFAS are everywhere by really trying to determine the actual PFAS sources in the environment. And we can do that using our professional tools like a preliminary assessment. We have this sort of past, present, future breakdown of the process in which we start with existing data, where we get to what do we know, and we can obtain some of that information by gathering available written and published information, and also by inspecting historical imagery. You know, what past site conditions tell us about a potential source. And I'll give an example of that in a future slide and tie it in. And then once you have enough initial information to start guiding the process to identifying possible PFAS sources, you can then inspect these areas through visual site inspection. And sometimes this provides context. For example, if a spill occurred in a location and it rained the next day or even the day of, what could be the direction of stormwater discharge and where does it go? So the site inspections can lend us some additional insight for potential sources. Visiting the site also provides you with the opportunity to interview site personnel. And this can be useful to confirm or sometimes clarify the information gathered from the resource review, or even discover new information that was not previously recorded or documented. And at this stage, you can begin a preliminary conceptual site model, which identifies the source, pathway, receptor relationship for the areas of interest that you've determined through interviews and the resource review. Now, why is that important? Because really at this time, if your source, pathway, receptor relationship is not complete, then you really shouldn't chase PFAS for that source. And that's not to say that you can't have multiple sources at one site, but it allows you to focus your efforts on identifying the right areas for further or future investigation. If your pathway receptor relationship is complete, then the investigation and eventual remediation or mitigation may follow, whether that's, refining a conceptual site model or improving the understanding of fate and transport of PFAS at the site. So really, the primary objective for investigating PFAS is to establish this source pathway receptor relationship that I keep referring to. It acts as a kind of like flow chart to determine potential PFAS source or release areas and evaluate whether those potential areas contribute to PFAS exposure in humans or the surrounding environment. Because again, if this relationship is not complete, then don't chase PFAS. We shouldn't lose sight of a really well-focused investigation due to this created theme of PFAS being everywhere. And in fact, I have seen sites where PFAS are not everywhere, which I know is slightly shocking. So to use this source pathway receptor model as an example, we have just two areas here of interest that are maybe due to testing and an accidental spill. The potential media will choose impacted soil, and there you can determine the pathways to the receptors. I'll just use as an example here leaching. Let's say we have shallow groundwater impacts due to leaching from soil and down gradient resident human receptors. They were identified, let's say, to have an irrigation well. And now we have a complete pathway. I don't think typically we run through sprinklers, but I know that at some point it was common practice here in Florida in the heat to have kids running around through the sprinklers to cool off. So that exposure pathway is open, and I just assume that that's a possibility, which again completes that pathway, and that would indicate the investigation for PFAS should continue. If there was not a resident down gradient with an irrigation well, then the likelihood of that pathway being completed diminishes. Now, going back to our past step of evaluating existing data, we can use the preliminary assessment process to gather valuable starting point information, using historical aerials, client-provided GIS for either drainage or stormwater information, using safety data sheets to provide insight into what products were stored or used at the site. And in Florida, we can use FDEP MapDirect, which has a multitude of information. And the next step would then be to conduct some interviews, if possible, either on site or even by phone. In pandemic conditions, we had to do that as well. And typically personnel of interest are site managers, long-term employees, firefighters or emergency responders, and retirees, because a lot of these products were used a good time ago, and the older staff, if they're still around, is really high of interest, almost like a bonus. Pretty standard questions for interviewing as an example of a fire training area would be, was AFFF used in the past? Now, AFFF, for those of you who don't know, is a fire suppressant that contains PFAS compounds, and that's why it's of interest in this example. Another standard question is, was there training required, which was typically consisted of spraying AFFF as an exercise onto a surface as a means to just learn how to use the equipment. And has there been an emergency response at the facility? And if so, was AFFF used? So very specific questions. And for other facilities, you can tailor those questions to a specific either site or an activity. And that's where you can get into questions about lubricants or pesticide, insecticide use, and depending on the company, even maybe patent pending technology. And that second bullet up there I have is, it's very important to remember that this is more of a fact-finding mission, not a fault-finding mission. You tend to get less information from interviewees who get the impression that they have done something wrong, and then they start to hide some information. So, the fact of the matter is, PFAS containing compounds or products were not regulated. So we're not really trying to find fault in anyone in this process, and it doesn't really help us get the information that we're looking for if they hide it. So just something to keep in mind that we usually remind ourselves when we do interviews with people. So here is a PFAS conceptual site model for fire training area from ITRC. Many of you have probably seen it in some form before, maybe even a different source. I don't intend on going over each pathway, but over the years, different pathways have been added to these conceptual site models. The more information we gather and better understand PFAS in the environment, the pathways to receptors information expands. And these pathways are important to understand depending on the source and site conditions. Not every investigation will have every pathway, and that in turn could potentially close certain pathway receptor relationships for that site. And you can even have multiple source types at the same site, and then that would then change your pathway receptor relationship as well. Okay, so let's dive into this hypothetical investigation. I just want to emphasize that this is not an actual site. It's just a simplified hypothetical example just for the purposes of this presentation. So we have a site here with potential AFFF use areas. Through records, we find that there's a hangar on site and it was equipped with AFFF, and it was tested once in the past when it was built. That becomes a potential PFAS source. Additionally, 2 potential fire training areas were identified. This former runway at the north was confirmed through historical aerials. And for this example, the former runway was visible in current satellite imagery, but that is not always the case, which is why historical aerials can be a good source of information If you only looked at current site conditions and you didn't see a former runway, it could have been missed as a potential release area. The former runway was suspected to have fire training, but through interviews and record search, it couldn't be confirmed. The other suspected fire training area was the current active runway at the south. Records indicated that fire training did occur at this suspected location. And then through gathered GIS data, we can put on their drainage system and even some surface water discharge to the river. So now that we have our potential or suspected PFAS sources identified throughout the site, we can take a more methodical approach at sampling for source characterization. Instead of just going out there willy-nilly and sampling all over the site, we have a really great defined suspected PFAS source areas for investigation. So for this example, soil, pore water, and concrete will be performed. So for each identified potential PFAS source, the appropriate sampling would be conducted. So we've got former runway location that had soil and pore water. The concrete was removed in the past, so we're not going to have any concrete samples from that location. And then at the current runway, we have sampling for soil, pore water, and concrete. And the hangar location would have soil and concrete samples taken. So this will provide the information we need to determine if further investigation for those potential suspected source areas is necessary. So during the source characterization phase, PFAS were not detected at the suspected source area from the former runway. And if there's no source, it does not complete the pathway. Therefore, continuation of chasing PFAS at that source area is no longer necessary. All right, now armed with the knowledge of our source characterization, the investigation can move forward. So we have 2 confirmed source areas down from the potential 3 sources that we started with. And what we do have are potential releases from hangar testing and fire training area at the east end of the active runway. Now, a sampling plan can be developed to determine source areas that we can identify impacts to the environment and possibly human receptors. Excuse me. Groundwater samples were collected at the source, up gradient, and down gradient. This will help determine the extent of the source as well. Since the site has surface water features, which can be canals, swales, or stormwater drains, they most likely discharge to the river, as shown on this hypothetical example. The pathway receptor relationship can then be completed through this discharge, which in turn moves the investigation forward to chase PFAS at those locations if they are detected above screening values. So for the hangar area, the results of PFAS were found to be well below screening values. And the same could be said for a few of those surface water samples. If you've ever seen one of these hangar AFFF tests, you know that this is probably unlikely, but for this hypothetical investigation, we'll just say below screening values. Where PFAS were detected above screening values was at the fire training area on the active runway. So this allows for a more refined identification and ultimately a more refined investigation of the site. So we are left with just the source area and sampling to the east. So finally, we can answer the burning question of should you chase PFAS everywhere? And the answer is no for several reasons. If PFAS are not found at a suspected source area, that's an obvious don't chase PFAS, which is what you saw in my hypothetical example for the former runway location. If PFAS are present but not detected above screening values, then don't chase PFAS, which is what you saw for the hangar location example. If there is no human receptor to PFAS found above screening values, don't chase PFAS. Now, if PFAS are found present above screening values at the source and pathway receptor relationship is complete, Then you would proceed and refine the investigation and chase PFAS. And that's all I have for now. Thank you everyone for your time. And hopefully you can leave this session with a little less heartburn than when you came in. Thanks everyone who worked hard to keep this conference going, even through all of the chaos of 2020. And if we have time for questions, I'd love to answer them. If not, you can contact me either by phone or email that I have shown here. And thanks again, everyone.
We're going to move on. Hopefully Dr. Townsend is queued up. Yes?
Hope so.
Looks like you are. Tim, glad to have you.
Good. I'm assuming you guys can see this?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. I'll go ahead and start then. First of all, good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Sorry I'm not there. It's getting so easy now to sit in front of your computer and your monitor and do these. Travel is going to be more challenging, I think, in the future. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing at the University of Florida and our colleagues elsewhere in the state in terms of PFAS. I'm going to focus the discussion around waste management issues. I'll weave in a little bit of some of the work we're doing right now, what we plan on doing, and some of the challenges which have already been shared to some extent by the panelists and speakers already, but to try and emphasize and reinforce, I think, some of the shared issues that we're all going to be dealing with in the years in the future. Quickly want to acknowledge, though, Gene Jones and SWIX for putting on the presentation and for inviting me. Also, real quick, there's a large team of researchers around the state of Florida, and I'm not suggesting these are the only people in the state of Florida working at the academic institutions on PFAS, but our team, John Bowden is a professor who is our PFAS analytical chemist expert, and I'll share a little bit more about what she does, what he does. And then also Helena Sola Gabriel, University of Miami, is kind of our partner in all this, and then a great number of students and others. So I want to acknowledge all of them. Real quick, we've got some work going on right now for the Hinckley Center for Solid and Hazardous Waste Management in Florida. Helena and University of Miami got some work going several years ago related to PFAS and landfills and what occurs in leachate. We've been continuing that work. We received a STAR grant from the US EPA to really focus in on landfills and leachates and a number of issues regarding that particular aspect of the waste management sector. And some of our more recent Hinckley Center work revolves around looking at things like management of residuals, and then getting into things like thermal treatment as well. Just real quickly, there are a lot of strong laboratories, and I'm sure there's a number there at the conference. Just wanted to share what we're doing. And again, we're a research university, so we've had the opportunity to get geared up. I'm not the expert on that. I'm a solid waste engineer, but fortunately, again, John Bowden is our expert on this. But basically, we're set up right now to do two types of PFAS analysis. Of course, we're doing what's known as targeted PFAS analysis. And the idea is, of course, we have standards for a number of PFAS species. And as the speakers have been saying, and I think most of you are familiar with already, there are thousands of these chemicals which are out there. And so we've been doing, typical suite of around 50. I think we're up to over like 120, 130 individual species that we look at. The problem is the more that you add, the harder it is to analyze and to quantify. And so the graduate students are having a challenge integrating all those peaks. But we've got a very good, robust library now of chemicals that we're looking at. And then we've been developing the prep techniques that go onto the instrument in terms of whether it's just a standard water, which is relatively straightforward, but when you start dealing with leachates or biosolids or ash or street sweepings or other types of media or matrices, it becomes a little bit challenging. The one thing I did want to leave you with, though, is that there's something we also do called non-targeted analysis. And the idea is that if you have, of course, thousands and thousands of these chemicals, we don't have standards for all of them. And we don't even know what all of these chemicals are. Dr. Bowden and his team have developed a technique where you can use software to be able to go in there and look at the spectrum and the fragments created in your LC mass spec and begin to try to estimate other types of chemicals that are in there so that you get a much more complete fingerprint. Because again, as some of the speakers have alluded to, these chemicals can change and transform. And it's not necessarily that you're, just because you don't see a particular species of PFAS in a sample that where it originally was, is that it's been destroyed. It simply might have been converted to other things, which might be less toxic, might be more toxic. So that's something that I can certainly, we have some literature that I'd be happy to send you, some papers that have been published on this, and can certainly put you in contact with Dr. Bowden. So some of the, you know, in the waste stream, I'm a solid waste engineer. So we do our research, and of course, what I teach about at the University of Florida is the management of wastes. You know, solid wastes, a subset of that being hazardous waste. But the types of PFAS waste, of course, we've already seen a lot about AFFF. There's a number of chemical products, a number of commercial products that contain PFAS, and I'll share a little bit more on that. And then there's, you know, these remediation residuals that have been hit on, and that, you know, as part of the cleanup of contaminated sites, you're going to have contaminated soils and liquids and sludges and spent GAC and a number of types of media. And again, I think the point was made earlier that a lot of the treatment processes right now are not destructive. They're simply concentrating treatment technologies. And so there's still a lot of work that needs to be figured out how to manage all those. Again, discarded AFFF as a media by itself, that's not typically going to be something that we, for example, dispose of in landfills, at least a subtitle D landfill. It's in, however, lots of products. And of course, this, you know, would connotate that, you know, there's some raw chemical precursors and things potentially that might be managed. But for the most part, what we deal with, we're going to deal with different kind of products that contain these slew of different PFAS species. And of course, why that got us involved is that these materials end up in landfills. So stepping back, and again, I'm hitting on a few themes that have already been hit on already, is that when you talk about solid waste, what you're really thinking about is you're thinking about hazardous waste management or non-hazardous waste. So first question, is this potentially a hazardous waste? We'll talk more about that in a second. I think we've already answered that question. And then, okay, if not, then what are your options in terms of managing as a regular solid waste or a non-hazardous solid waste? First though, let's take a quick look, and again, to kind of emphasize what we've seen before, these regulatory levels, because, and I say regulatory levels, we're not necessarily talking about standards, we're talking about advisory levels or thresholds or target levels. We know that there's the PFOS and PFOA health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion, and has been indicated by a number of folks already. What you find out is that a lot of the states are now getting out and developing their own set of risk-based levels. And so I'll show this because we're going to use it a little bit long and kind of a little bit later in a hypothetical discussion about hazardous waste. But you can see California has a guidance for drinking water of 14 parts per trillion or 13 parts per trillion, excuse me, for PFOS. And then of course there's the target levels for soil. The one thing that I've, you know, and again, the last speaker or a couple speakers ago was talking about, it's not that common to see soils that exceed, especially that commercial industrial provisional SCTL in Florida, perhaps the residential, but just take a look at the leachability number. The leachability number, which again is a soil cleanup target level, which is a kind of a theoretical amount that would have to be present for it to leach above a groundwater cleanup target level or water-based health threshold or something like that. Look how low it is. And so the real challenge that we see in a lot of these cases, unlike other contaminants that we see, for example, we do a lot of work with PAHs, and PAHs have very low direct exposure target levels. you know, in terms of direct exposure, human health risk. But the leachability concerns aren't necessarily that great because they're not very mobile. But the thing is that these chemicals tend to be very, very mobile. And so those really low leachability soil cleanup target levels suggest that, oh, wow, if this were to be disposed of in a landfill, for example, you would expect most of that material to come off and get into your leachate. And again, I won't dwell on it much longer, but the idea or the understanding is that all the states are out there now developing their own. Some cases they'll match with the federal numbers in terms of the PFOA and PFOS, and sometimes they're lower. And in some states, they're beginning to develop those thresholds for many other chemicals as well. So, as already has been stated, though, is under RCRA, there is no pathway for currently PFAS to be a hazardous waste. It's not listed right now. It's not a on the U or P list in terms of a substance. There are no F and K listed hazardous waste streams. And then really for it to be a characteristic hazardous waste, it would have to fail TCLP. And there is no PFAS, PFOA and PFOS are not included on the toxicity characteristic list. But interestingly, something we do in our work, and again, somewhat from an academic perspective, but you know, when RCRA developed the TC list, this was really back before it was even called the TCLP, when it was first EP Tox. But back, you know, what RCRA was first passed in '76, and the regulations started become promulgated in '79 and '80. The list hasn't changed that much, really, since sometime in the '80s. They haven't added any new chemicals. But if we were to take the same logic that they used then, which they take the drinking water standard times 100. Well, if we were to take PFOA and PFOS, which again are not drinking water standards per se, and you multiplied that by 100, what you'd find is that, well, the average landfill leachate, for example, would not typically fail TCLP. It would be above that. But if you were to use, for example, the California limit, most leachates come out of regular domestic landfills right now would be greater than what that TC limit would be. Again, that hypothetical TC limit. Now, I am not at all suggesting that EPA is going to propose to add anything to the TC list. They haven't done that for many, many, many other chemicals which are on the drinking water standard list. But to give you some context of what of the concentrations that we see, and I'm just talking about landfill leachate here. I would assume that an AFFF media would be many, many times larger than that. If you're talking about just the chemical by itself or something that's been highly concentrated after a recent spill, would probably be many times, 100 times what the health advisory limit is, just to give you some kind of context. So if it's not a hazardous waste, what are the options for managing these materials? And again, I'm focusing more on the types of materials that are not going to be, say, an unused container of AFFF, or, obviously those things are going to be disposed of just because of liability concerns in some type of either hazardous waste or specialized waste treatment facility. But what about remediation waste? Let's say you have some soil and it has some PFOA and some PFOS in there. Or it's, in our case, even just regular waste has these materials in there. So one of the things we're doing for the US EPA is looking at PFAS in landfills. And so a big focus has been placed recently, and this is something going on in Florida, but it's going on around the country and around the world already, is to look at PFAS in these different waste disposal systems, both by the type and the age, what kind of landfill we're talking about. Municipal solid waste landfills, of course, these are the landfills. In Florida, it would be called a Class 1 landfill, a Subtitle D RCRA landfill. Are going to have liner systems. And so the leachate's going to be contained, not suggesting at all that if there's PFAS in the leachate, that's going to be an issue in terms of contaminating the immediate environment, but it is going to be in the leachate. We found it in construction demolition debris landfills as well. So there are sources in C and D that contain that. And, even if you go and you look at the ash disposal sites in Florida, you see PFAS in the leachate. Now, if you really, really dive into the data, which we've been trying to do, is what you'll find is that the ash itself doesn't necessarily leach very much. But if you put But if you put other materials in there, you co-dispose of any unburned material, it'll have a disproportionate impact on the leachate PFAS concentrations. And that's kind of somewhat illustrated here. I won't dwell on this, but if you guys email me, I'm happy to send you information about the different papers that are out there being written and being published on this now. One thing we did, and this is I guess maybe the job you don't want to get as a graduate student, but we went out to the transfer station, and as the garbage trucks were coming in, typically they'll discharge that leachate in the garbage truck onto the transfer station floor, and that gets mixed in with the waste and ultimately is going to go to the disposal facility. But we took leachates from residential and commercial garbage trucks and analyzed them for PFAS. And what you find is that it's there, and it's at relatively large concentrations. Not a surprise, but if anybody was thinking that the reason you see PFAS in landfill leachates is because there's lots of contaminated soil, or even that there was firefighting or fire extinguishing incidents at the landfill site, or that there was chemicals disposed in, it's not. Just regular household garbage contains enough of these materials to result in relatively high concentrations. And I can't go into it now in this time, but they transform. And again, this whole issue that just because you have PFAS and it's no longer measured for that particular chemical doesn't mean that it hasn't transformed into something else that might be better for human health and the environment. It might be worse. One of the things that we're doing, in fact, we've already done it this year, is that we've been trying to really dig into what are the primary categories of our waste stream that contribute to PFAS. And this is an example of a typical waste sort. This is not one from recently, but in the past. But in our business, doing a waste composition study is pretty common. And we do this fairly regularly for a number of local governments, dividing this into different waste components and just measuring it. But now what we're doing is we're actually combining a waste sort, and then we're doing leach studies on the major components of the waste stream. And what we want to try to do is isolate what are the big contributors to MSW with respect to PFAS. Are we talking about the plastic food, packaging? Are we talking about organics? Are we talking about paper products or textiles, or is it carpets? And so the idea is to get a little better sense of what in our waste stream at our landfills is causing some of the bigger issues. We're also doing a little bit of work just kind of focusing in on specific aspects of landfills, including treatment. And so we've been around the state sampling a lot of different landfills. And of course, what we'll do is we'll sample leachate from the lift station, which can be a challenge. And of course, as already been mentioned, just the whole how you sample PFAS to avoid cross-contamination is a fairly large undertaking. And then the idea is looking at leachate as well. Excuse me, not leachate, but leachate treatment, whether it's a biological treatment system, a chemical treatment system. Most leachate goes to a domestic wastewater treatment plant in Florida right now. So it's going to a wastewater treatment plant where domestic wastewater goes. There's a little bit that goes to industrial wastewater treatment plants, and some have their own treatment or pre-treatment facilities on site. So there's Jake out collecting a sample of leachate from these different ponds. They collecting from these different tanks. This is actually a powdered activated carbon treatment system at one of the landfills in Florida. And again, I'm happy to share information. We've also done a fair amount of work with RO. You know that membranes work well. And so membranes for leachate treatment, again, what you're doing though is you're concentrating the material. One thing that's interesting, and we've published a paper on this, is that the foam that you see, of course, is pretty common in leachates, but it's also a characteristic you would expect of PFAS type chemicals. And we've published a paper and developed some technology where if you do a foaming step and capture that foam, you do a really good job of concentrating a lot of that PFAS out. So that's something that we've been exploring and continuing. So if you're disposing of just let's say PFAS contaminated residuals, say soil or things like that, in a landfill, then you should probably expect that it's going to be mobile. There's going to be some transformation that occurs, but you should expect that it's going to move. you know, I have full faith in the regulations in terms of the landfill liners and such that are there now. So I'm not suggesting that this is an issue of environmental concern if the landfill is built correctly and operated correctly. But the thing is that leachate has to be removed, and has been hinted at before, that leachate then has to go somewhere and has to be treated. And it might just end up, if the PFAS is mobile through the landfill and then ends up in the wastewater treatment plant, then it might end up in the biosolids, or it might end up in some of the effluent. So it's going to make landfills have a more difficult time than they already do getting rid of their leachate. And so then kind of the other question is, well, what's the best way to stabilize? And I think we're going to hear a talk about that in a minute. But, you know, what is the approach that you use to try to minimize? Remember, if you have PFAS contaminated, say liquids or sludges, before they can go in an MSW landfill, subtitle D, they have to be bulked up to pass paint filter tests. So you would take them, for example, to, you know, like Clark Environmental or some facility like that bulks and sends off to a landfill. And then, you know, that might be enough to hold it in there so the water doesn't come out, but that doesn't mean the PFAS isn't going to be mobile. Kind of getting close to wrapping up here, but I did want to say something about thermal treatment. And so when you go and you look at the literature right now, there's not a lot out there about the potential for destruction. I mean, in terms of validation and practice, there's certainly literature out there that suggests that at the right temperature, you can destroy these chemicals. You got to get it to the right conditions at the right temperature. There's even suggestions that if you add certain elements or minerals to the incineration process or the thermal treatment process, that you can get additional destruction. You know, there's some literature out there about lower air type of thermal treatment technologies. But to me, you know, this is kind of one of the things I'm fascinated about and really want to, I think, kind of explore and try to contribute is, you know, opportunities for soil treatment using these high temperature thermal oxidation systems. The idea that if you put it, what's our choice? We put it in a landfill and then it's probably going to come out of the landfill. We really need to be exploring a way that we can destroy. Now, stabilization and putting it in a landfill, okay, you know, that's certainly going to be better than just putting it in a landfill that's not stabilized. But, and so, you know, one of our research objectives and initiatives is to really try to help examine how to best use existing technologies, upgrade them with the right kind of air pollution control techniques and equipment so that we can use a more classic soil, high temperature oxidation treatment system for PFAS destruction and removal. So stay tuned. Hopefully there'll be more to discuss in coming years on that. So where we're at UF right now is we're continuing to assess landfills and the common solid waste streams. We're doing more landfill sampling. We're actually building some landfills. I mean, these are simulations out near our lab where we have known amounts of PFAS so that we can look at transformation, attenuation, destruction, for different types of waste streams under different conditions. We're also looking right now, we've got a big project going on PFAS remediation residuals, which I'll talk more about in a second. And then the idea is that I really think the thing we need to start, you know, exploring is this thermal treatment. How do we figure out ways to destroy the PFAS from these waste streams as opposed to just end up putting them in the landfill where we may have to revisit them later. So we're doing one project right now for the Hinckley Center where we've basically taken some PFAS residuals, primarily contaminated soils from a few different remediation sites, and they're doing the leach tests to be able to try to quantify the amount that leaches. Remember I said before, leaching is huge when it comes to PFAS, and I think that's really going to dictate a lot of the risk assessment and the corrective action that's required. And I'll leave you with this. There's my email at the bottom if you don't already have that or know that. So we do need more remediation residuals, whether it's, you know, whether they're soils or sludges or other things. We've had a number of folks who have helped contribute. You know, again, I want to thank Clark Environmental. They've provided some samples that we've been testing so far. And then I just throw out there, you know, we welcome any ideas you guys have for needed research, and we're certainly open to collaboration. It's been a lot of effort to be able to get the analytical capability set up at the university, and certainly we want to try to do our best to continue to help the state, local government, industry, and of course the citizens of the state of Florida move forward on this particular issue. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And I appreciate
it. Thank you, Dr. Townsend. And for our last speaker, and by the way, we're a little ahead on time, so we will definitely have some time for questions. But our last speaker is going to actually delve into a specific remedial pathway. Our last speaker is Paul Rule from Lafarge. And Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Am I on? Hello, hello.
You're
good,
on.
very
I
good.
can hear you.
Well, first off, I have to thank Gene Jones for inviting me to come here today. It's always a privilege to speak to an august group such as this. But this is my first field trip in 13 months. I'm not wearing gym shorts today. I actually have dress pants on. This is from a guy who spent 2 or 3 days a week traveling prior to March of last year. I feel like a prisoner who has been set free, like I've got a reprieve from the governor. So Gene, your new title will be Governor Jones for having set this prisoner free. And I truly hope that you find my presentation interesting, educational. But if you don't, I live 30 miles north of Detroit. It snowed in Michigan on Tuesday. So you're from Michigan? Oh, sister, you know what I'm talking about. It's a bit further north than here. So even if you don't like what I got to say, I got 2 days in Florida. This is great. Lafarge Holcim is the largest cement manufacturer on earth. It's not a commercial, just to give you perspective. A lot of you may not even know who we are. We're in 70 countries. There's like 70,000 of us or something like that. And we usually make cement and other building products to pave roads and build buildings and bridges and all that kind of stuff. And I'm in a team of 4 people at Lafarge Holcim who don't do that. We do other stuff with cement. And what I've been doing for the last 40 years in the industry is using cement products for cement solidification, stabilization, encapsulation type work, if you're familiar with that type of technology. And I also want, for clarity's sake, I realize I'm speaking to a room full of a lot of engineers. I'm a chemist. My degrees are in pure chemistry. I speak chem-ese. When I use big words like goop and slop and crud, I'll explain that to you what it means. But let me go to the first. Did this work? Oops, that's not what I wanted. I want to go back. How did we get here? We all have a network. I've been at this game on May 1st, 44 years as an environmental chemist. I started right out of the 3rd grade. And I don't know how I ended up 44 years in, but over that 44 years time, I have developed my own network. We all got networks. Your car doesn't work, you're talking to some colleague at work and say, I got a guy. Yeah, I know I got a guy. Or my fridge doesn't work. You go, oh, I know a guy. Yeah. Call this person. He'll take care of it. We live and die in the environmental world with acronyms. Can we agree on that? In fact, we have our own language. We could have a complete language, a conversation where an outsider who's not in the environmental business would, well, is an STLP or TCLP for RCRA versus TSCA, and they're all looking at you cross-eyed like, what are you guys talking about? Well, I've got an acronym that I guarantee you none of you know because I made it up. It's the OGN. Anybody ever hear the OGN? If you did, I don't believe it. I made it up. It's a group that I refer to as my old guy network. To be in my old guy network, there's no dues. You don't have to pay anything. But you have to be at least 60 years old and been in the business for over 40 years. And it really, where I come from, the ladies say, hey, you guys, so this is not a sexist thing. You can be in this. I just need a lady to confess to being over 60 years old and having 40 years in the business. And you can be in the old OGN if you would like to be. But the OGN is a bunch of smart guys who are specialists in something. We know a lot about a lot of stuff because we've been around a long time. But you have to be a specialist in something. And mine happens to be solidifying crud, goop, and slop. I can solidify anything. I can encapsulate it. And I had a meeting with a good friend of mine named Paul Scretia from the ROCAM. They make RO. And I'm glad actually to follow Dr. Townsend's presentation because I'm going to take some of the stuff he was talking about and expand upon it. And ROCAM makes an RO system. I'm sure we're all familiar with reverse osmosis. And I had lunch with my, the OGN typically does not have an agenda like this. The agenda is set by whoever offers to buy lunch. And the OGN always meets either at lunch or dinner. And generally we'll get together and we will solve some of the world's problems. If they would just listen to the OGN, there wouldn't be world hunger, there wouldn't be division in the United States, we'd have everything fixed. But they don't listen to the OGN. And on this particular day, Paul Screech and I happen to be great fans. I like to ask myself, how did I get here? Why am I in this room right now with you people? Why are we all here talking about PFAS? Well, for me, it started with an OGN lunch with Paul Screech. But there's always a primary agenda. And this particular day, we're both fans of classic rock. And the topic of that day was, who is the greatest lead guitar player of all time? Paul said Stevie Ray Vaughan. I said he was great. But I said, Paul, he was in high school and we were in high school. Everybody's sitting at the feet of Eric Clapton. Everybody knows he's the greatest rock and roll guitar player of all time. And the singular most non sequitur I've ever experienced in my life, the next question he asked me was, what do you know about PFAS? This is 3 years ago, May 8th. I've been a lifelong chemist. I knew about PFAS, you know, Scotchgard, Teflon, AFFF, and Forever Chemical. And then within 35 seconds, I told him everything I knew about PFAS. The last 3 years, it has dominated my life. I have been conducting R&D on the encapsulation of PFAS from landfill leachate. And specifically, from RO concentrate. This is a schematic of a landfill that we're working with in Michigan, covered by an NDA, soon to become public, because it's going to be commercialized next month. But they take 100,000 gallons a day of raw leachate, they run it through an RO, they discharge 90,000 gallons to a stream under an NPDES permit. That's how clean it is. They can discharge this stuff directly to surface water. The other 10,000 gallons has 100% of pollutants that were in the original 100,000 gallons. And of course, it has our good friend PFAS in it. And so my friend Paul asked me, he said, can you solidify this concentrate? Now you say snarky things to your friends that you wouldn't say to a group like, you know what I'm talking about. I said, Paul, I can solidify Lake Michigan if you give me enough cement. He said, well, I don't need you to solidify Lake Michigan, but I do need you to solidify 10,000 gallons a day of RO concentrate. My customers tell me I got a 90% solution. I'm taking care of 90%. It's getting discharged. It's going off site. They don't have to dispose of it. What do you do with this? At this particular site, they were just recirculating it. And you pick it up tomorrow and you run it through the RO. And you recirculate it. And the next day and the next day and next week and next month, you just keep recirculating this 10,000 gallons that you capture, that is captured every day through the RO system. And he said, can you solidify that stuff? I said, sure, I can do that. He said, what does a good test look like? He said, I don't know. So literally, what I'm about to explain to you folks about the R&D I've been doing for the last 3 years started literally on the back of a napkin. Okay, what would be a good test performance? No free liquids after 24 hours. Okay, that's good. No free liquids after 24 hours. Okay, how about a reduction of at least 2 orders of magnitude in the PFAS between what's in the concentrate versus what's in the leachate after you solidify this stuff? Sounds good. Let's start there. Did a little literature search. At that point in time, nobody had been doing this type of work. Full disclosure, patent was filed 2 years ago. We expect it to be issued anytime, imminent. So the work I'm talking about is patent pending, but I fully expect it to be issued by next month or the month after. But there was nothing in the literature. How does one go about encapsulating RO concentrate, reducing the leachability of PFAS? So my initial swing at the pitch, I did 42 mix designs using all of the different products. Cement, by the way, my friends, is not a generic thing. It's not like buying rice. We make 10 different types of cements at LaFarge Olson. And that's very typical for a cement companies. You make different types of cements for different types of applications. Then there's cement kiln dust, and we got fly ash, and we got all sorts of quarries that got lime dust and things like that. And I took mixtures of all the above based upon the fact that I had been solidifying industrial liquids for decades. I knew how to make liquids solidified. And after the first day, half of them still had free liquids, so I whittled that down to 21. And by the time I was finally done, I sent 5 in to the lab for leachate. And I'll talk about this in more detail. This is the RO concentrate tank. In the laboratory, I can measure out mixtures of different cements to hundreds of grams very accurately. It's very difficult to do that in a 1,000-pound super sack. But these were pre-blended at one of our facilities with the final magic dust combination that I'd come up with in the laboratory. So in this super sack is the blend of various cement binders, measured as accurately as it can be done on a truck scale, which is about plus or minus 20 pounds, not 2 decimal places. But when you're doing it on an industrial scale, close enough has to be close enough. The site didn't have any mixer, didn't have a pug mill, so we had to innovate. That's a ready mix truck. That's where most of our product normally goes anyhow. And by the way, do me a favor. How many of you are guilty of calling that a cement truck? Do not call that a cement truck. Not in the presence of a cement guy. That's a concrete truck that has sand, aggregate, cement, water. That's a concrete truck going down the street. It is not a cement truck. So you have at least learned one very valuable thing today. From this day forward, that's a concrete truck. In there, we had put the measured amount of RO concentrate as the makeup water as opposed to potable water, which you normally have to use for making concrete. And then we entered the cement. Now, this is one of my favorites. It's like 2 trucks mating there on the left. We had to get the material from the ready mix truck into the spray truck. Down below there is there's a hatch where that slurry was fed down the chute into the spray truck, which you see on the right. Now, for our first field trial, this is a field trial where they're spraying the slurried concentrate onto the side of a hill. This is not the working face of the landfill. We just wanted to see how does it adhere to about a 30% incline. So right now, that's just practice spraying. And that's what it looked like after 15 minutes. Now there's an attempt at levity on the right. My colleagues at Lafarge Holcim have renamed this stuff PFAS because I spend most of my time on PFAS, encapsulation and remediation. So just as a little snarky thing back to my friends at Lafarge Holcim, I was wearing gloves, by the way, when I put my handprints on there. And I wrote PFAS in the cement. And this was actually for internal enjoyment only, but got such a kick out of it, I put it in my presentation here. But the point is, this is 15 minutes after that slurry had been sprayed on that 30-degree incline. It adheres really nicely. The intent here was to turn this into an alternate daily cut. The original plan from my friend Paul was just to turn it into a big old glump and throw it into the landfill, another technical term I use as a chemist. But the landfill guys weren't all that happy about filling their landfill with glump because it takes up airspace. Well, you got to sell that airspace. So the second attempt was, can you make this stuff so it's a slurry long enough that we spray it on there, turns it into a solid within 15 minutes, and within an hour starts to get hard? Sure, I can do that after going through a few more studies. But we saw that this adheres pretty darn well. And as I say, this is at about 15 minutes. Now this is supposed to be able to play as a video. I don't know if you can play it in the back or not. If not, yeah, there we go. This is slurry PFAS being sprayed on from the face using existing spray truck. So what you see is the makeup water is the concentrate from the RO system mixed with my magic dust. And this again is 15 minutes after it's been sprayed on the face, working face of the landfill. That is the concentrate from the RO mixed with the slurry, no longer being circulated back into the landfill as a liquid. The comment that the manager at this landfill said to me, and I liked it, was, I like putting the concentrate back into my landfill as a solid because I won't see it again. Now, what are we doing to this stuff? I'm a fan of EPA method 1310B. It's called the structural integrity test. What it requires you to do is, I've done this for years with contaminated soils. You take your media, you mix it with your binder, you put it into this little cylinder that's 7.1 centimeters tall, 3 centimeters across, and has about a 90.7 square centimeters of surface area. Why is that important? Because that slop you see there on the left-hand side used to be liquid slurry. It's cured for 30 days. It's put into that little compactor that you see on the right. It's exactly 0.33 kilogram mass, dropped 6 inches 15 times onto your sample that you see on the left, taken out of the mold. If it fractures, you take the pieces and you send that to the laboratory for an SPLP extraction. The one on the left, obviously pretty firm. It didn't fracture at all. And you send that in. When you have a liquid, you virtually have infinite mixing between all the components inside of the liquid. But I've turned that infinite mixing into a 90.7 square centimeter surface area. So when it's going through the SPLP extraction process, there's a whole lot less surface area exposed for potential leaching. Why not TCLP? Because it's not a hazardous waste landfill. I was thinking about what Megan was saying earlier. You don't chase stuff you don't have to chase. It's a non-hazardous waste landfill. You don't do a TCLP extraction. You're looking for things you don't want to find. The SPLP, what is it? Synthetic precipitation leachate procedure. What is a landfill going to be exposed to? Acidified precipitation, for sure. And in case somebody wants to ask me offline or later, I'm not a fan of leaf. I do not believe it's relevant at all. And I'll explain that sometime offline. I don't have the time, but I'm not a fan of leaf for this type of extraction. It gives you hundreds of data points that you can't use. When you use cement, you get a spike in pH of about 12 to 13 because it's very basic. When it solidifies, pH has no meaning. pH only has meaning in aqueous solution. You all remember that from your general chemistry class, right? Okay. I know I'm talking to engineers, forgive me. But anyways, the 1310, this sample that you see here then is all of it in its entirety is exposed to an SPLP extraction methodology, and then you take that extract and you test for all sorts of cool stuff. Here's very typical results. These are not cherry-picked. That's all I can tell you right now. These are not cherry-picked results. This is very common results. We have site one. These are from 2 different landfills. And you'll notice one says sand, no sand. One of the things I found along the way is that cement will bind up a lot better if it's got something to snag onto besides itself. When you're taking leachate, it's still pretty much just water. And the cement has to play 2 roles if you don't use sand. It has to be a small aggregate, and then it binds itself together. By adding a little bit of sand, we could use less binder and get even better results. Every one of those in Site 1 meets Michigan's current drinking water standards inside the landfill. Obviously, I don't have to hit drinking water standards inside of a landfill. Site 2 would be just fine. It's from another site where we did not use sand. PFAS, you see, a little bit higher. And what I am finding right now in states where I am, like Michigan, where Michigans are getting very aggressive on PFAS. Other states are getting very aggressive on PFAS, others are not. What they do love is that alternate daily cover thing where you're not recirculating that, or it's the landfills that are having to discharge that RO concentrate, or even worse, all the leachate off-site for disposal. The cost differential for on-site treatment is dramatically less costly than off-site disposal. And then here's some other data. One of the things I'm finding, I'm learning as I go, a lot of the landfills are concerned about conductivity, things that would offer conductivity. Of course, the ions are the conductors. And you can see, again, a dramatic change. We do add a little calcium. That's not on there. We add a little calcium because there's a lot of calcium in cement. But you can see across the board a reduction. In some of these cases with the metal, we're actually stabilizing, changing from ions to metal hydroxides. You all remember your solubility rules from your first year of chemistry, right? Things that form insoluble precipitates in aqueous solutions. I'm sure you do. We are stabilizing, which is a term of art, the heavy metals into metal hydroxides, so they never leach out anyhow. And then, well, there's lots of different stuff on there, but I just wanted to show some typical data. And I think that's it. There's my photoshopped picture. Not really. But if you have questions, my email is on the bottom, and I think I have my, I don't know if you can read my cell phone number down there or not. And I'll be sticking around if you want to talk later, as will my colleagues up here if you have further questions, but I'm all done. Go ahead.
Perfect. And we have magically managed to reserve time for questioning at the end of this, which is great. So I want to take the questioning in 3 separate spots. And if we can turn on Megan and Tim's mic, I'd like to ask the presenters, again, we've got 20 minutes. I'd like to ask the presenters if they've got any comments or questions before we turn it over to the audience. For the people who are attending remotely, if you can send in your questions via chat and we'll. Oh, I'm sorry, we've got the raised hand signal if you've got a question, and hopefully one of the guys in the back working the controls will wave at me so I can look over and we can ask that question. For the people who are attending in person, just so we can capture your question, you've got 2 options. You can stand up at the microphone and ask your question so that it gets caught by everybody. Or if you're afraid or shy to do that, you can pass it to me in a small piece of note paper, which would be even more awkwardly obvious. And I'll read the question out. So for our panel, any comments, any questions? And Tim and Megan's microphones are on, right? We have 5 questions already. Perfect. Okay.
Let me see if this is on.
You're on.
Okay. I'll just take a couple of minutes since I ceded my time, but I've reclaimed it. A couple of minutes to just tell you what's going on at the state level in terms of policies and whatnot. One of the biggest issues we're dealing with is certainly the surface water number, even though it's a non-regulated number. A lot of clients are asking, what if we exceed surface water? What happens? And we don't have an answer yet because are those surface waters discharged into surface waters of the state? If the question is yes, then the equation changes. So as Eric said, surface water is an issue that is going to be popping out for everybody. If you're a consultant, if you're an attorney, if you're a city, if you're a fire department, what do we do? Does that really mean we have to retrofit stormwater conveyance systems as part of the remediation? Because as you know, this is being handled under a rule that requires remediation. And so keep that in mind. I have a few clients at our airports, and retrofitting stormwater discharges or conveyance systems for airports is incredibly expensive. I'll add this, very likely additional PFAS are coming to be regulated by DEP. You probably know that already, though. But certainly, I anticipate that before the end of the year, we'll have additional PFAS to be regulated. And so just keep an eye out for what those may be, although I think most of us know which ones are going to be. Last but not least, the federal act that I mentioned before I ceded my time. This one requires, and we're probably going to laugh because there's chemists here, the elimination of PFAS. I don't think that's going to happen. But also requires tracking of all the PFAS. It requires that everybody tracks PFAS in groundwater, which I'll be speaking about this later on. And right now, the only institution that is exempt from liability at the federal level are airports. But as you know, cities are also utilities are into this game. You just saw this presentations. And so the federal act, it's called the PFAS Act. Take a look at it. It's very interesting. I think it's important to know that, things move very slow in the federal government. And so we'll see what happens with that act. But as I said before, it requires that this substance is be incinerated. And as you know, in Florida, we really don't have that capacity right now. So all our clients have to ship these substances out of the state to be handled or store them in place until our remediation technology is out there. So those are the comments I wanted to give you. I'll be speaking more about it this afternoon.
Right. And I think a lot of the questions, I know one of the questions that was raised to me is what happens to this sort of daisy chain of liability as leachate becomes the transport system for contamination. And I think we'll be covering that, Laurel and Jorge and I, in our afternoon session with Frank Hearn. But how are we going to do questions from the audience? I know we've got 5 questions up there. What? Well, that's Tim. Okay, yep. All right. First Meta. I understand you have a question. I can't see the screen from here, so reading it is a bit tough for me. David Quacho, I'm getting your name right. I think you had a question. Your mic should be active.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess kind of a 2-part question. One, with all the litigation that's going on with PFAS, I've seen that there is a theoretical potential concern for vapor migration from PFAS, though theoretical. Has that been brought up in any litigation as a potential concern, or are we still just worried about surface and groundwater? And I guess a follow-up too is, are all of these litigations, are they mainly focused on landfills, airports with the AFFF, or are any of them towards some of those other potential areas of concerns, including dry cleaners and or like car washes, for example?
Well, and I'm going to ask Laurel to hop in on this, but I know I haven't seen any vapor migration issues on any of the cases coming up.
No, I've not seen any vapor migration cases. The AFFF cases, the MDL suits I was talking about, that is all limited just to firefighting foams. But there are other pieces of litigation that are related to other uses of PFAS chemicals. And I was just talking to somebody actually who was running the Vermont program, and their big surprise was they're finding it in car wash effluent and in septic systems serving schools from all the floor waxes. So again, it kind of boggles the mind, but it's like it's everywhere.
Right.
And it's in everything. And one of their biggest sources of deposition was from a fabric manufacturing facility that did fabrics that cover big stadium facilities. Mm-hmm. The airborne deposition led to a huge widespread
from the waterproofing on that
unbelievable
fabric. Yeah. Sure. All right, any live questions? Anybody in the audience? You guys are all looking terrified. Perfect.
Hello, I'm Drew Baird with FRX. I'm tempted to ask Dr. Rule for a debate on, Mr. Rule for a debate on best guitarist of all time. But, I'll defer to that. But you're going to need a lot of concrete to fill Lake Michigan based on some recent bathymetry of around 1,200 cubic miles of water in that lake. But we can talk about that at the reception.
A lot of cement.
My question's for Dr. Townsend remotely. There are practitioners in the remediation marketplace doing fairly early research, including some field work on thermal remediation, thermal destruction of PFAS compounds. And their data show much higher temperatures to achieve significant reductions than you quoted through which you said that treatment mechanism is pyrolysis. And you said 400 to 500 degrees C. The data I've seen from one practitioner or one service provider for thermal is more like 800 degrees C, maybe as high as 900.
2000.
C?
2000 C for 2 seconds is for Tosca waste. And I'm assuming this is going to be like PCBs.
No, this would be for in situ. Sorry, I didn't specify that. This is for in situ treatment over a longer period of time. So Dr. Townsend, can you speak a little more to pyrolysis mechanisms and maybe why we're seeing a difference between what you said at 400 to 500 and what I've seen in the marketplace of 800, for example.
Tim, did you get that question?
Yeah, I heard that. Thank you. And I'll have to go look at those studies. That was just an excerpt from some literature that had been published. And of course, pyrolysis at kind of a low oxygen thermal treatment technique. But the range of temperatures that you talked about, that's I think what typically is going to be expected for most thermal treatment operations. You know, whether or not pyrolysis or these lower temperature conversion technologies allow you to operate at a lower temperature. These lower oxygen thermal technologies, whether you can operate at a lower temperature or not, I can't say that that's true or not. That's just simply something that's reported from that study. But I'll grab that study and I can send it to you and we can talk about it too.
Right. Thanks, Tim. Is there another remote question? You're going to have to hit me with that again. I'm getting deaf at this age. Blakey Singlinga? Linga. If you're out there, your mic is on. If possible, can you share a list of EPA regulations involved in PFAS? And I think we can, and I would lay you odds before the end of the seminar, that's going to be part of the acta of the seminar. So all part of the proceedings. So yes. Any more live questions, sir?
Yeah, this is Sir Paul. Guilty as charged. I'm an engineer. But you know, it might be Eddie Van Halen. It also might be Jimmy Page. But as far as the guitars go. But I was wondering if you've looked into possibly making building construction materials. As an engineer, I really love construction.
The short
so
answer is yes.
About, you know, making block or doing something else?
Yes, we're doing that right now.
You're doing that.
Yes.
Right now.
What a great sustainability question and answer.
Indeed.
Any
I'll
other
be glad to
live?
discuss that with you in more detail if you'd like afterwards. But the answer is absolutely yes. We're doing it right now.
Perfect. Thank you.
We've got 6 minutes left. Jorge?
One comment for everybody. If you are involved in the, I was just talking to Laurel here, and from the bellwether cases, 2 of them are in Florida. Of course, one of them is in Stewart, and the other one is in Emerald Coast Utilities. Those the court has selected to go up. If you have filed what they call the plaintiff fact sheets, we were informed that that stage is done. Basically, the plaintiffs have submitted all the data, you know, whether they had little records or in some cases, troves of records, that's done. So the stage right now before 1 or 2 go to trial, and that's going to determine, you know, whether these manufacturers are going to settle or they're going to keep appealing all the way to the Supreme Court is expert finding is occurring this summer. So if you're a consultant for a plaintiff or a defendant, and if you are a defendant, chances are you're going to be deposed. And, you know, so more than likely, one case in Florida, as Laurel said, is going to trial. And that's going to determine whether the rest of them, you know, whether the defendants realize that this is an uphill battle. They're just going to go ahead and settle. And, you know, in settlements, whatever that happens, I don't know. But we're coming. We're coming to the end of this effort of, you know, procuring experts, et cetera. But right now, that's where things are. And so this is very timely that we're discussing this thing because we anticipate the next time we meet here next year, there will be probably some determinations by the judge.
Well, and one of the interesting and possibly terrifying sidelights of the Stewart site is that's also the focus of one of the DEP PFAS migration and mobility studies as it leaves the suspected generator site, travels through several properties, one of whom I looked at for a client, and impacts potentially, or at least I think the data shows, impacts a residential neighborhood on well water, on potable well water. And there's some, I don't want to say interesting, I'd say terrifying data related to that.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, you know, how a lot of these things tie together, like the forensic study, you know, obviously the assessment, all of that is going to have to kind of come together, because I think this is going to be a situation where if you look for it, you find it, and then you don't know where it came from. And there's going to be, you know, multiple sources. You know, maybe there'll be some that are major, obvious, but all of this will come together at some point, and in a process of, we've got to have area-wide solutions like we had for EDB back in the 90s, you know, where the state, I think, delineated like 500,000 acres. It was an amazing amount of property where basically well restrictions were put in place, and that's how it was dealt with. Mm-hmm. And we've got to get back to something like that here for this, because it's going to be monumental.
Right, quickly.
Quickly.
All right, we have time for one last question, and I'm sorry for the remote attendees, but I'm going to ask if there's one last live question. Anybody? In that case, one last remote question. Anybody still have their hand raised? Roy, if you're out there in TV land, your mic is active. No, all good? We're good. In that case, thank you guys very much for waking up so early, braving putting on long pants and attending. Thank you.
How much of your work is PFAS related? Yeah, so is mine. I wondered. I was asked about what I've been doing. But as a result of this directly, I'm working now with Rutgers University, the grant for the Department of Transportation, all on AECOM, and every stinking area.